excited to be hosting this session with you today. And before I start, I'd love to just acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we gather, and we're all on different lands. So I pay respects to elders past, present, and emerging on the land of Yagara and Turrbal people on which I reside. And I know that wherever you are, just paying respects to our traditional custodians of the land. And moving on, we have had such a busy year already. 2022 is almost over. I think there's not many days left. I know my daughter's counting down the days to Christmas, and this time of year can get really stressful. So I was really inspired to share my thoughts and insights and stories on how to keep calm when the chaos hits, because this time of year, it's meant to be a time for family and relaxing and connecting with people. But as we know, sometimes situations with family members can be a little bit stressful. When you hit the shops, it could be quite stressful with people in the shopping centres and wanting to get presents and people pushing and shoving. So in dealing with all of these external situations, when our kids and our little ones sometimes have their emotional outbursts because of what's going on, sometimes it can be really hard to manage it all, and particularly within ourselves. So today I just wanted to share some of my tips in being able to stay calm in the chaos. And it does come down to one thing. And this one thing is something that we can all connect with. And, you know, parenting is definitely a journey that we trial and error a lot of different things on the way. So this one thing actually is about tapping back into ourselves and understanding our own emotions and where our triggers are at. And so I'm just going to share my screen now. So hopefully you'll be able to see this, and this will guide us through tonight's session. So I've got, oh, it's cold. I just saw Teresa's. You're cold and we're hot up here. Well, hopefully you're staying nice and rugged up. So I'm just, where can I share my screen? There we go. Share screen. Let me do that. Desktop. Oh, allow Zoom. Yes, please. Okay. Now, I actually, I got a new computer. Well, it's not new. It's a secondhand computer that I purchased from school. And so I'm used to just being able to have everything all operational. And this is not going to let me share my screen. So that's okay. I'm just going to go with the flow, and I'll have my screen. And what I'll do is I'll save this as a little resource to share with you all. Because, you know, life is sometimes about being spontaneous and going with the flow, because that's what we do as parents and that's what we do as humans. So 3 hidden traits about emotional traumas and outbursts, and the one solution that will solve it all. So that was the whole, I suppose, catch to get everybody in and excited. And these hidden traits are things that I've been talking about on my own Facebook page. They're not really hidden. Sometimes we just forget, really. And when we remember these moments, and when we're in those heightened phases where our little people or teens or whatever age group of our children to youth that we're dealing with, or even our lovely partners, just reminding us to tap back into our breath and tap back into our nervous system. So the 3 things that I wanted to talk about and address was this idea of HALT. So HALT, which is looking at the trigger points. And this is like got to do with our survival mode, and not just with our little people, but even with ourselves. Are we hungry? Are we angry? Are we lonely? Or are we tired? And if we are any of these, our fight, flight, freeze responses are going to kick into play. And if we are any of these or a combination of these, then we will get triggered, and our emotional fight, flight, freeze responses will make us feel those emotions. So we also know that, I know my daughter gets hangry. So when she gets hungry, she just immediately gets into angry mode, and she gets super hangry when she's not fed. And, I notice also when she is feeling alone and by herself, then again, that can make her feel really sad. But then it's also reflecting like, does that happen to me? Yeah, totally. Like I noticed that within myself. And so when I can notice these pure survival response modes in myself, and notice when I can, feel these triggers coming up, it's like, okay, well, I need to stop and have a break, go get a snack, go get something to eat, or, go and hug somebody if I'm feeling alone and have a cuddle, or have some connection time with somebody. Or if I'm tired, just having a sleep. Like today, it was so hot and I had a headache, and I was like, you know what, I'm just going to have a cold shower. And then I had like a power nap for like half an hour, and I feel so much better for it. So just really listening to my body. So that was number one that we're going to talk about tonight, HALT, and go really deep into, what that means and noticing that in our children. Number two is we talk too much as adults. We talk too much and we want to try and solve things because our brains are mature and we've had all this life experience. We try to overcomplicate things and talk too much and try and solve things now, when sometimes all we need to do is just stop and just be present and be there. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And number three is feeling it to heal it. We've heard that saying, go feel it, that's saying, feel it to heal it. But it's this idea of being able to express these emotions and not suppress them. And I'm going to share some stories on all of these, on like what I experienced in my life and what I've noticed as a parent. And, being able to go with the flow. And we do this great as mothers, like going with the flow, but sometimes we try to control things or hold on to things a bit too much. And then that stresses us out. So it's like, well, how do we allow ourselves to feel our responses and create space to tackle those hairy situations and tackle those high emotions with more compassion, not only for ourselves, but for the people, the little people or the big people that we're dealing with, and just being present in those moments. So they're the three things we're going to touch on these traits about what gets us to these heightened emotional states. And, in all of this information, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a doctor, I am a teacher. I deal with a lot of learners. I've dealt with thousands of young people in my time teaching over the last, I don't want to say 15 years teaching more. And it doesn't really matter what their background is or, what is happening in that young person's life. It's being present in the moment and being able to respond to their emotional state and where they're at, and understanding how their brains are working, how their bodies are working, how we can cultivate safe spaces for them to feel and be engaged. And so that's where my expertise comes from, is from, me trialing and error and mastering my craft and being able to work with a variety of different people in the different situations. And also my experience as a nurturer, like me mothering them and nurturing them with my teacher hat on, because, some of these young people and teens that I've worked with, their safe space was school. Their safe spaces were my classroom. And all those years of experience helped me and continues to still help me in my mothering journey, in my parenting journey. And that's why I love this work and I love reading. And so before I get into any of this, like all of this research and this data and this information is well researched. And there is, you know, other ways forward that we can help cultivate in our relationships and in our ability to build our emotional intelligence and to help our little people navigate their own feelings. So I just wanted to share before we get into it some of my favorite books that I love. So Dr. Daniel Siegel, The Whole Brain Child, if you can see that. This is a fantastic book. He's got a lot of different books out, but this is one that I've read a lot of as being a teacher. And before when my daughter Aya was a toddler, because I wanted to understand how to navigate and nurture and go deeper into understanding a developing mind with the knowledge and understanding that I had already as a teacher, but going further into my own child and looking at these really foundational things that help, you know, form identity and help form how we react to things and get triggered by things, because these things, these triggers can be long lasting. And I know I felt that in my own experience because of things and experiences in my upbringing that weren't so positive. So that's probably where a lot of my passion comes from, is like I wanted someone to be able to talk to me about this or help give me space and time to figure out why I was feeling these things as a kid or as a teenager, and to talk to me about it. Because when we cultivate that language around understanding how we behave, how we react to things, or how to become less reactive to try and problem solve, that's only going to be beneficial to when these young people turn into adults, because, you know, we are all relational beings. So that's why I really love this work. So another great book that, well, I've got a few of Dr. Justin Coulson's stuff. Now, Dr. Justin Coulson is Australian as well, and he is the father of 6 girls, and his girls range from like little ones to, I think, recently married. So he's gone through the whole process, and I was lucky enough to sit in on a seminar with him last year when he came in and spoke to some parents at my daughter's school, which was just fabulous. And that kind of sparked the next layer of understanding about emotional intelligence. And then, you know, that was something that I really wanted to cultivate in my own relationships, my personal relationships, working with my daughter, working with the kids and the teenagers around me. And then I ended up doing an emotional intelligence course for leadership training, which then delved a lot deeper into this knowledge that I had, but it was looking at work relationships and cultivating emotional intelligence around those professional relationships, which was amazing. And the final book I wanted to share before we get into any of this, beautiful Brené Brown's Atlas of the Heart. And I was gifted her other book, Dare to Lead, which I'm excited to read about. But Brené Brown's Atlas of the Heart, it talks about, it maps a lot of the emotions that we experience and the narratives that we tell ourselves, you know, when we experience certain things as well, and really breaking down where these stories come from and how we get triggered into feeling these things. So this is one that I just got recently, but if you love books like me, those are some of my top ones that I recommend. And I refer to them quite a lot, actually. So yeah, that's just a little bit of sharing of resources and where I get my data from. There's heaps of stuff on the internet as well that you can go to. So I personally love sharing stories and telling stories and getting wisdom from people's different experiences. And that's something that I think we need to do more of as a society, more of as women, to, you know, share with other mums that you're not feeling alone and you're not doing this on your own, because experience this whole array of emotions, not only for ourselves, but also for our little people. So the one thing, you know, that is probably the key bit of magic and bit of wisdom that has helped not only me personally solve a lot of things for my emotional and energetic kind of understandings within myself, but also bring that into my parenting, is coming back to the nervous system. And so in the slide that I've got here that you can't see, is it talks about the vagus nerve. And our vagus nerve is a nerve that stems all the way from down here and goes all the way down and touches every organ of our body. And when we come back into the parasympathetic, which is when we pause, take a deep breath in and exhaling out, and slowing our heart rate and slowing our breath, we're re-oxygenating our cells, and we're learning to come back to calm and come back to pause, so that we can take a moment to tap back into our logical prefrontal cortex. And so when we understand our nervous system, that's how we experience the world. Our nervous system and that vagus nerve is how we feel and sense the world around us. So sight, smell, taste, touch, what else is there? Hearing, you know, everything is sensory that we experience in this world. And when we look at our beautiful children, they experience the world immediately from their senses. So when we think about when our babies were babies, you know, that sense of touch and smell, the first thing they smell, you know, they're in our wombs, that the fluid, the blood, the motherly smells, that's what they're connected to, and that sense of touch when they come out. And so this sensory experience of how they experience the world, you know, is how they make sense of their relationships with their mother and their father, through the touch, through the sound, through the smiles, through the facial expressions, through the eyes. And then over time, as we start developing and building language, we forget how important that sensory experience is through our body. And so no matter what experience you have, whether it's a tantrum, whether it's a work party, whether it's whatever, you know, if you find yourself getting in that stress state, then coming back to the breath and noticing how your body is feeling and sensing, and just taking that moment to slow down will help calm a lot of different things and help just get back into your body, because our body wisdom, we're born with it. And over time, we forget. So befriending and understanding the unique responses of our nervous system is so powerful. And it's a great antidote for dysregulation that can arise from chronic or traumatic stress. So not understanding the responses of our nervous system can create its own inputs that increase fear and amplify dysregulation. And when we notice our little people becoming dysregulated because they're learning so much in such a short amount of time, this dysregulation is when we have the triggers come in, the halt, and then we jump into fight, flight, or freeze, which I'll talk about shortly. So these bodily sensations from anxiety and feelings of being destabilized in our body can quickly escalate into panic or feelings of being scared of what's happening around, and we don't understand these sensations. Sometimes as adults, it's really hard unless you really can discern. Like there have been times where I'm like, I don't know what I'm feeling right now. So you can imagine what our little people are experiencing when these sensations come through their body. So it's like, you know, when I took the effort to understand how my brain worked and how my body worked, and these key features and functions of just developmental processes, I was able to then be able to look at some of these techniques that we're going to talk about and apply them, embody them in my own life. So then I could help my child or help the young people that I work with embody that calm or that change or that different perspective in their lives. And so understanding how the brain perceives these things, we have a beautiful amygdala in our reptilian side of our brain at the back there, our emotional side of the brain at the back here, which are the oldest parts of our brain that initially were created for survival mode. So when we talk about fight, flight, freeze, fawn, all of these these initial survival states, they're here. They were designed to protect us, to protect humanity. When we notice those things in protective mode, we just immediately go into these stress arousal states. And so when we can learn to tap back in to like the vagus nerve and it back into our parasympathetic nervous system, back to the breath, back to being calm, we can then be able to sit in that rest and digest kind of process where we can think and turn it off, turn that little bit of the amygdala off. And in the halt state that I talk about, this hungry, angry, lonely, tired, that comes back to the amygdala. And so Dr. Siegel talks about, the amygdala made me do it. I'm angry because the amygdala made me do it. And when they're little people, they just do these things spontaneously. You'll notice they get from this phase of being calm, and then sometimes they can just jump from here to here really quickly because their brain and the amygdala in that the reptilian side of our brain, the oldest part of our brain, just goes into this protective mode. And in my beautiful slide, I had this picture of Aya doing angry faces with me and then sleepy faces. But yeah, so when we understand our brain, we've got like our upstairs brain and our downstairs brain. And so with our upstairs brain, that's where the logical thinking is in our cerebellum, in our prefrontal cortex. That's the most newest part, the youngest part of our brain, where we get to logically think about things and can break things down and analyze. And in that part of our brain, we've got like our left and our right brain. And you hear of people talking about left and right brain thinking. And our left brain, when we look at understanding that, loves the logical side of things, loves the literal, anything linguistic, it loves lists. Our left side of the brain just loves anything in linear and is so like on top of everything. And it is the side that likes to have everything analytically in order. When we look at our right side of our brain in this prefrontal cortex, this is our holistic side where the non-verbals are really, really important. And so when we look at this holistic side, it really connects with facial expressions, eye contact, looking at tone and voice, and looking at your posture and your gesture. So when we recognize our kids or family members in these heightened states, Dr. Justin Coulson says, when you have high emotion, you have low intelligence. And that's really stuck with me, particularly when I notice adult conversations can get really heightened. And I've really made an effort to kind of educate my family and go, when we're in these heightened states, our heartbeat is going really fast. We are breathing more fast. We are just snapping at each other and we are in this heightened phase and our intelligence is really low. Even though we may think we are right and smart and doing all the things, our intelligence is really low because we're back in the lower staircase. We're in the lower part of our brain. And so when we stop to connect with our parasympathetic, it actually comes back to the right side, the holistic side, and it allows us to be able to think of the bigger picture and stop and reassess. And that right brain's response also links to that kind of gut feeling, like the heart brain, that feeling response. And that's where we want to connect with our children from that right brain response. Thinking about our non-verbals, thinking about our tone of voice, thinking about that emotional side. So this right brain is our emotional side, that intuitive side that is really, really natural. This is the experiential side that we kind of flip in between. So our right and left brain in the top part of our upstairs brain sends so much signals between our left and right. So sending and receiving, and it's this communicative process where the synapses are coming back and forth. So when we can understand our minds, and then we think about our children who's still developing and understanding these big emotions, allowing ourselves to just stop and to breathe and to be able to connect and think about our tone of voice and think about those non-verbals. And sometimes the non-verbals are so powerful. If it's just holding their hand and being silent, rubbing their back, just, speaking in a softer tone, that's what they need in that moment. And so I think in my own upbringing, that didn't really happen. It was just like a quick straight into command and demand mode or dismissing what was being said, or get over it, that type of thing, or she'll be right, or toughen up. All of these old paradigms of moving through these emotions and not actually feeling them, I think, are paradigms that need to be shifted. And to understand humanity and to understand how our young people can be felt and heard and validated, that's going to make them feel worthy and make them feel less ashamed and make them feel like they're listened to and valued and like truly loved. Because children spell love, time, time. By giving that time to really connect with them, is so valuable. And it's in these moments, these tough times, where we show up for ourselves and we show up for them. These are the times that they're going to remember as their safe spaces. These are the times that they're going to remember that my mum or dad actually sat and listened to me. These are the times where this safety that gets to be created creates a safety in their body. So then when they deal with big things in their lives, when they grow up, that they can handle it and they can come back to their body and come back to being safe in their body and feeling, that they have the skills and the tools to deal with anything that comes their way, and to allow that feeling to come through. And so understanding our mental staircase is really, really important. And so that's just a little bit of understanding how the left and the right brain work, and the lower versus the upper. And when we think about the downstairs brain, the amygdala, like these structures were created to protect us, and they do. Like when we are in motion, like in moments of life where we need to run, or we need to go and do something, or we need to, that's important. And this fight, flight, or freeze, these states we see in our children many times when they get heightened or when they feel big emotions. So that's why coming back to the breath is so important. And if anyone watched the little interview I did with Aya, like she just automatically talked about coming back to breathing. And so having that technique of taking a deep breath in and out, then that extending the breath out is really, really important. There were times when I did this when I was like maybe 2, where I was like, okay, let's count to 10. She's like, I'm not counting to 10. I know what you're trying to do. And I found it really funny that in that counting to 10 process, in that slowing of the breath, her fight mode went into play. And it was like, oh, okay, let's try something else. let's look at that. Oh, what colors do you see? So engaging the senses in the body in a different way. So this leads me now to some of the tips that I was sharing in some of my lives. And these are just a few strategies that can work a lot of the time. Sometimes they don't, and that's okay if they don't. And you just breathe through it, and then you just ride the wave. And so, just gonna go through over here. Connecting and redirecting. So connecting with how they're feeling. And so when you notice that if they're little and they don't know their words about how to describe it, then you help give them some words. Like that's what I started off with Aya. It's like, are you feeling sad or lonely or tired or angry? And now we have a whole array of emotions as well. So being able to connect with where they're at in this moment by saying things like, oh, I can see you're really frustrated. Oh, what you made with the Lego is all broken now. Oh, and if they agree, they'll acknowledge that. And if they don't know, then help them with the words. And if they do start building the vocabulary, it's like, I can see you're really upset. What are you feeling? And just asking them so then they can identify that as well, which all of these tools can kind of work together in synchronicity as well. And I've noticed when I use them, when we start getting into these moments, that it does de-escalate that dysregulated feeling. But sometimes if you miss it, and I have many a times, then it's things go out the door and you just got to take the time to help them calm and be present with them. And so that connecting with where they're at and redirecting. So when they're in that emotional state of sadness or despair or anger or frustration, redirect their focus because they're in that lower part of their brain. So redirect, it could be by engaging their senses. Oh, what colors do you see? Like the see, feel, touch. And you could do the 3-2-1 method, where it's like, what's 3 things that you see right now? Oh, and if they don't want to, you could go, oh, what color is that? And then now they might go, oh, no, it's green. Or you might go, is that orange? And then it's like, no, that's green, mummy. So then you could get them to start tapping into the logic brain, the upstairs brain, and disconnect them from the amygdala. And so it's like this redirecting process, like, give me 3 things that you see right now. What's 2 things that you can hear? Oh, what does that feel like? And this could be a short process or it can be a long process. And that connect and redirect strategy works so well. I was noticing a beautiful little girl in a dance class that I'd walked past that I was in, and she's neurodivergent. And I was talking about neurodivergent children, I think yesterday. And these beautiful children, they just are wired differently. So when we understand how our brains work, how our neurodivergent children, and these are children that might, ASD, autistic, they could have language disorders, they could have sensory processing disorders, a whole array of different ways of sensing the world. So, this little girl, she was on the floor and she was having a massive meltdown. And I noticed her mother was sitting there with her and she was trying all kinds of things, and I'd just gotten changed. So then I sat with the mum and this little girl, and I tried this technique. I did the connect and redirect. So I said to her, let's call her, I won't use her real name, let's call her Sarah. I was like, oh, Sarah, I can see you're really upset at the moment. And she nodded, you're really frustrated. I can see you're really frustrated in your face. And she's like, yeah, I am. And so acknowledging where they're at. And then because she was already she's very sensory driven. So I could see she was, touching the ground and doing things. So I was like, what does the ground feel like at the moment? And it was just in starting to redirect her brain to get out of that emotional state and get into her body and get into her senses and up here, that got her thinking and analyzing and listing things. Remember, the left side of the brain likes to list and be logical. So I was tapping into that side. So I was like, okay, oh, what does that feel like? Oh, what can we hear right now? She's like, oh, the music. I'm like, yeah, it's very loud, isn't it? Oh, yeah, it's hurting my ears. I'm like, oh, maybe we should turn the music down a little bit. And then I just asked the lady to turn it down a fraction, and that helped. And then it was like, oh, what does this feel like? And it was like, whatever a shirt was. And what does mummy's shirt feel like? And then she started to calm, because she started to breathe again and not get stuck in this cycle of the story and the feeling. And when I've noticed that with my own daughter, it's just been really interesting to see, actually, if you catch it in the right time, there's no right or wrong time. When you can trial it out, the difference in how they can get out of that sensation and being stuck in that feeling to then, laughing again. And when I do these things with her now, she knows what I'm doing. She's quite clever. So I have to try other things. Sometimes we'll still do it. She'll just do it to please me. But there are other strategies that I use to kind of get her laughing and to break her back out of that and whatnot. So instead of like commanding and demanding of like, do this or do that, or don't worry about this, or come and go to your room, or go do that, connect and redirect. So that was, something that I really engaged with and I was doing innately in a lot of my teaching as well. But it was like, okay, well, now I actually know what this technique is called and found it really valuable. That also links to the name it to tame it technique. And Dr. Segal talks about naming the emotion. And I think being able to identify things, particularly for our left side of our brain, which loves lists, and being able to identify the emotion helps us understand how we're feeling and helps our little people understand, what is going through their brain. In my free mini masterclass that I did, there's a great activity for adults actually that gets you to list, to think about the last, day and write down all of the emotions that you experienced that day. Have a little think now. I'm going to give you like a minute. Have a think now. If you have a little pen there, maybe you can list it on your hands. What emotions did we feel? And what I might get you to do is to make this a little bit more engaging, is to write in the chat how many emotions you could list. You got a minute. So you can type it in your phone, you could just think of your head, write down how many emotions you felt today. And in the chat, just adding the number, just so I can see. So how many emotions did you feel today? 7? Yeah, cool. Thanks, Teresa. 10, right, Danielle? 12, awesome. Yeah, cool. And like, our vocabulary and understanding our emotions. Like for me, while I was doing that, I felt tired, calm, overwhelmed, stressed, anxious, exhausted, angry, helpless, really like excited, inspired, as there's 10 that I've just listed there. So in these emotions, when we can look at, well, how many of those words that we listed were positive? And give yourself a percentage. how many were positive and how many were negative. So give me a percentage of like how many words of that list were positive versus how many were negative. For me, I'd probably say 70% was negative that I just listed out. 7% positive. Oh, yay, Danielle. Great. Beautiful. For me, so yeah, it depends on how you're feeling in the day. I myself am just with Aya being sick. There was lots of things that I felt resistant to. 50-50, Jody. Yeah, awesome. And so when, so Teresa, let me know what roughly percentage. And it can depend on each day. When I've done this activity before, it's been like I've just been able to, the first time I did this, I did like 7 or 8 words. And the next time I did it, yeah, I've had a hard day. Yeah, mine was mostly negative. Mine was like 70% today. And there were some positive ones that I just said at the end there, but that was just like labeling them off the top of my head. But it can change day to day because depending on what you're doing. So when we can be aware of the vocabulary that we have to describe our emotions, we actually experience a lot in the day, a lot physically, mentally, and this emotional intelligence and understanding and this awareness, some people don't really have. Like, you know, other people I've spoken to, they might be able to list like maybe 3 to 5 emotions. It's like, wow, when you look at the array of what we do actually have the capability to feel, and you look at the vocabulary lists, it's like, oh, actually I felt this, this, and this, and you can name more, and it's like, wow, we can actually see that it's quite complex. Emotions are very complex. And so as us as adults, when we become aware of that ourselves, so that we can help our little ones navigate and start to build their awareness, it's really, really valuable. And I mentioned this really cool app that I used, and I used this last year. I found it. It's called iReact. And on that app, it had like faces on it that Aya could, you know, do different faces. Like she could do like happy face, angry face, frustrated, embarrassed. There was a whole array there, like that was there, that she could do all these faces. And there's a beautiful calm app, perfect. And for her, like being able to recognize these emotions when she was feeling them, she could tap them, and then she was the one that could take the photos of them and put them in the app. And then she was able to then start to go, well, angry is not actually really angry. You know, I'm actually frustrated or annoyed. And, you know, when we as adults can understand how wide and varying our emotions can be, and where on the spectrum of positive versus negative, then that just builds our awareness and understanding of ourselves. So then when we can work with our little ones in their big emotions, we can help give them the language and help get them to discern as they grow and develop. Like this gig, this is a lifetime gig. And, you know, we do have an important job as their parents, as the custodians of their little selves. They're going to leave us one day. Like they're their own sovereign beings. And it's our jobs to mentor and guide and love them and give space, and also set boundaries and teach them about consequences and teach them all these things to navigate their world, to navigate their own relationships in safe and healthy ways that are balanced. So that's why, you know, I love this topic of emotional intelligence and cultivating these more positive ways of talking about it. And so naming it to tame it is a big veer off that one, but that ability to be able to identify and therefore be able to then tell stories and get our children to tell stories in order to tame these big emotions, and being able to tap into our memory so that we can replay and integrate those feelings. That's the key. And even as adults, going back to things that triggered us in our childhood, right? There are things that trigger us and perhaps still do today. It's like, oh, why am I still resistant to that? Oh, because that happened to me as a kid. Why do I still get frustrated and annoyed and like this when this person talks to me? It's because this trigger, this wasn't dealt with. So when we can help our little people tell their own stories of what happened in the day and look at it from this perspective and this perspective or this person, we're building empathy and we're building this perspective taking when being able to, they call it rewind and remember. So it's like, we're the movie makers, we can control the story. So if something traumatic has happened to a child, being able to confront that in a safe way and retell that story is a way to make it less impactful, and by telling the stories and bringing it out brings the power back to the child or the power back to us, so that emotion that is triggered there doesn't stay with us. And so being able to replay and integrate that is really, really important. So how we do that at their level is by encouraging them to talk about what's happened, using their language, using their stories and their skills, and we can help them interpret it, but it's not us, trying to solve the problem for them. It's us helping guide them to notice their involvement in it as well. So telling these stories to tame these big emotions so they don't have the power over us, it takes time, and that is a skill, to take time to do. And even as adults, we struggle at times to bring back painful memories. And so I noticed with myself, my story with my miscarriages, that was so painful. But the way that I can tell it now without being triggered is because I've practiced and allowed myself to reframe my relationship with that experience and to reframe how I saw that trauma and those triggers. Like, there were times, I had 3 miscarriages in a row, and you guys all know that. And there were times where, particularly that after that third one, all the triggers from before that I thought I had dealt with came back. Every time I would look at another pregnant woman, I would get so jealous and so envious. And I'm like, I'm not this person. Why am I feeling this? And it was because, it was this story I was telling myself. It's like, they get to have this and I don't. I must be broken. I must be unworthy. I must be blah, 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 blah. So I was telling myself this story because seeing other people happy or seeing other people have something that I couldn't have at that time made me feel all of these emotions that made me anxious and sad. And that linked to this deep sense of grief and fear. And that took a lot to peel away. And by claiming my story and by claiming that part of who I was, that deep trigger, like I felt really, so when I think about telling the story, I'm thinking about children or kids that may have really deep trauma, that may have happened to them, or even other people. Like, when we can share that story and be able to talk about that experience and honestly share where our emotions were at, we can then detach in a healthy way because we're facing those big emotions. We are integrating. So I can proudly say I've integrated all of those feelings and those emotions, that deep grief, that deep pain, that sense of aloneness. Go back to Holt. Hungry, angry, alone, tired. And that aloneness feeling, lonely, like I was all alone in this. Like, I knew other people had gone through this, but that didn't matter. In my mind, I felt alone. And then when I look back at my childhood, that loneliness, that was triggered in this experience and this part of my adult life, because as a child, as a little girl, there were many times where I felt alone and not valued. And that childhood memory in those feelings that weren't nourished came through my adult life. And that's why I am so passionate about, like, when my daughter goes into these emotional states, I have the space to be present. Sometimes she doesn't want me there, so that's okay. I'll walk away, and she wants her space, but she can tell me that. But I've tried lots of different things to create that safety, that when she feels ready to come back to me, she will. And she does. So I give her space, and then she will come and go, Mommy, da 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 da. And that's beautiful, that she knows that she can come to me afterwards when she has self-regulated herself as a 6-year-old, to then feel whatever she needed to feel and have a little cry and come back to me and talk to me about it afterwards. That's amazing. That's amazing. Doesn't do it all the time, but I notice these times, and it's this practice and this cultivating of this. And that's what we want, like, even in our relationships as adults. Like, I notice even in, you know, coming back to my breath when there are heightened conversations, I don't have arguments with people. I have conversations, because I don't argue. I will say my piece. And I say this with a smile now, because this has taken me decades to master for myself. And it's not me being in denial. I know that triggers and things can happen, but I can come back to my nervous system, and I can come back to my breath and go, this is heightened, but I'm not having an argument, because I know how to come back to my body, and I can listen to that person. I can still say my piece with my authority. Sometimes I need to shut up and actually really listen. But then when I feel like I have to say something, I will. And I'll say my piece, and I'll say it with a calm tone, because tone is important. And how you speak to people and respond to people is important. And so in my own personal relationships, like with my husband, with my mother, who were probably the most powerful relationships that I needed to learn to harness, I've learned to come back to myself and my body to regulate my emotions. And if something is too heightened, I would choose to walk away and go, nothing's going to come from this right now, because high emotions, low intelligence. And we can come back and talk about this when we're calm. And then my husband and I do. And then we actually laugh about a lot of things now. We have really, really good conscious conversations about where we were both at. And it's like, cool, well, that didn't escalate into argument like it used to. And when I used to get into arguments, I would always go into freeze and flight, and I would go like this and cry and go inwards, because that's, as a child, my little girl would do that. And so this work is really important, not only for ourselves, but for our children. And so in order to change that within myself has taken a lot of time. And these strategies that I'm sharing with you for our children, that are in a lot of different resources, you know, are things that I started doing, like move it or lose it. I was talking about this technique to move. Movement is medicine. Moving to a new room. If a child is having a massive meltdown and tantrum, take them somewhere else. I know my beautiful husband, when I would have massive meltdowns and we're in the living room or somewhere else, and she's like, she had tantrums. I know Jodie's seen them before as well, but she's had massive tantrums, and he would take her outside, take her into a different space to just be absorbed by somewhere different, away from where that emotional response happened. So moving not only in a physical space, but also like moving the body. Let's go for a walk, or let's go for a bike ride. No matter what background, moving, getting the body, coming back to the senses again, getting back into the body to disengage that amygdala and that emotional brain and get back into the body and get moving is such a lifesaver. So if you ever find you're stuck and you're getting frustrated or emotional too because things are not moving forward, go for a walk, change the situation, go physically move somewhere else, go and kick a soccer ball, go and punch a boxing thing or punch the pillow if there's frustration, anger. She can get really angry and frustrated at times, and she just automatically starts punching because she's like, I feel it in my hands. Like, go punch a pillow. She will stamp her feet, she'll punch a pillow, as long as it's not ruining anything. I think it's really important that we get it out, because if we don't, we suppress. And as women as well, we can suppress a lot. You know, I always would be like, I'm such a positive person. I don't get angry at things. And there was a lot of deep-seated anger and rage that was suppressed from my childhood, that actually came up in my third miscarriage aftermath. The rage that I felt, so deep, and it wasn't about the situation that I just experienced. There's a lot more behind that had been suppressed, and this experience of loss and grief, of grieving of myself and my identity, and grieving the process of not being able to express all of this, that came up. There's so much power in rage that it can be harnessed, but it's like we need to let it out, because that can fuel passion, that can fuel a lot of different things. But if we don't let it out, it can fester and be really painful. And I remember one time where, I, after Christmas, had this massive rage meltdown and tantrum, and it was just intense. She was like hitting me, and I would pop her. I just had to put her in her room because she was like screaming and knocking things, and I remember holding the door, and she was like slamming on the door, and like I was like, wow, this is a demon child right here. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't know. I didn't know how to deal with this. And and every time we tried to solve it, it would loop again. It just kept looping. And she would just get stuck in these stories. And it was that tantrum went for legit 6-7 hours. Never happened again, because I spent the time to figure out what the real triggers were. And that took a lot of time. And so this idea of, I spoke about, instead of denying and dismissing, which is what happened to me a lot. Oh, you'll be right. Or like, oh, just stop annoying them. Dismissing how I was feeling as a child. I didn't want to dismiss her anger and the rage. In those moments where I felt so at loss in that moment, I was like telling myself this story. How beautiful that she gets to experience this level of rage in a safe environment, because I never got to experience that, because I was too scared. I was too scared to even let it out, therefore suppressed it. So I have a lot of respect for parents that allow that feeling to be felt. Yes, all of these techniques, they can help us stop them before coming up. But when they do come up, allow surrender. Sometimes we have to surrender. There's no other way. And we can then also surrender into our emotions and feel lost and helpless, and that's okay. That's okay. And I reframed in that moment again, like, you know, and I say to my husband, I was like, because he couldn't deal with it. He like legit walked away because he didn't know how to deal with it or create that safety. And he's like, you know, he's like, I just couldn't. And I was like, okay. So then again, I felt really alone and trying to deal with this. So I was feeling a lot of different things at that time. But I love how just adamant I was in being persistent, in being able to not just leave her to deal with it, but to be with her in those times and to be present with her in those emotions. So she didn't feel alone. Even though she was like screaming on the door, I was still on the other side, myself crying, but I was still there. And so allowing her to feel it, to heal it, and then when we were calm the next day, keep talking about these things and keep quiet. Like I had to keep questioning. And she was 4 at the time. This was at the end of last year, or 5 at the time. But she's had meltdowns like that as 4 or 5-year-old. And this feeling it to heal it, this allowing her to express and not suppress, and just sometimes going with the flow is so uncomfortable for us. But leaning into that discomfort is so important. This is the, you know, I spoke about showing up. This is where we show up for ourselves as parents. This is where we show up for our little ones and create that safety in those moments of turmoil, that they know that we're still there when they're at their worst. When they're teenagers and there's all kinds of influences, when you look at sex, drugs, you know, bad influence, like they, as teenagers, you remember what it was like when you were a teenager? You know, I deal with teenagers on a daily and I hear all kinds of conversations. You know, these moments where the risks are higher and the risk taking for them as they develop in their identity and wanting to fit in, like these moments now when they're little and they're younger, and we create these spaces for them to feel these emotions and we can talk about it, that is preparing them and us to have that safety for them to come and talk to us when they're feeling these emotions with their peers and their friends, when they're getting peer pressure about taking certain drugs or alcohol or these things. You want them to come. I want my daughter to come to me or other beautiful adults that she feels supported by to talk about these tough things. You know, when we think about the choices that our teens make, I want her to come to me and feel safe about talking about boys and things, you know, or another person that she feels safe doing it, talking that with. Because I didn't have anyone to talk to other than my friends. And I don't want that for her. And I want her to be able to feel like that she has safe spaces to talk about these tough conversations that make us uncomfortable. And as adults as well, when she's an adult, I want her to still come to me and talk to me about, you know, when she's a mum one day, and talk to me about her emotions and feelings when our children are adults. And if they choose to be parents, you know, they, like I said, we're relational beings. It's in our nature to socialize and connect with people. So being present in these uncomfortable moments of chaos is so important, because this cultivates those safe spaces where they can come and talk to us about anything. Look, there'll still be things that they don't want to talk to us about, and that's okay. But the big things, the scary things, the stuff that we grew up with and we understand now as adults, like imagine being able to hold space for that non-judgmentally. We still love them, but being able to, you know, what if our young ones end up having children early, you know, and they're too scared to talk to us about it and they want support, you know, being able to cultivate these spaces for these types of situations. I want my daughter and any young beautiful person that she's friends with to know that having these conversations are important, and being able to feel non-judged and to feel respected and to feel heard and witnessed and felt. That is important. Like I said, everything comes back to our body, comes back to our senses. So that's why our nervous system is so important, not only for us, but for our children. And that's the one thing that is going to get us through anything else. Our nervous system, our central nervous system is how we experience the world and feel the world around us. So when we cultivate positive emotional spaces, then it allows that sense of safety in our bodies, in their bodies, and in their thoughts and their feelings to be expressed. And so in that, just going to my next slide, in understanding this sense of feeling and to be heard, you know, when I deal with teenagers, they just actually want someone to listen. And I find in the classroom, and this was, you know, with both young men and women, and just getting advice on friendship issues, on maybe sometimes things, you know, dealing with parental things, you know, or just things that light them up, that they're passionate about or that they're curious about. And I always had really interesting conversations with young people, and I still do, but they just want to be heard and listened to. Sometimes we try to solve straight away. So this was one of the other points that I brought up, is we talk too much. We try to solve and reason, and I find our beautiful men, they do like to talk a lot, because that's part of how their brains work. They like to solve problems and things like that. So I have to remind my husband, like, just listen. I just want you to listen to me. And I want you to just hear what I have to say and go, okay, I hear you. I really understand. Like, I just want him to hear sometimes, and not to like solve the problem. I just want to like blare it out and just to be heard and felt, and just to go, oh, okay, cool. I empathize with you. And that's it. If I want something to be solved, I'll ask. But with our kids, less is more. You know, these strategies of being able to name, entertain, to connect and redirect and just be present is really, really important. And when we stop talking sometimes and really listen and encourage them to tell their stories through their voice, that's really important for them to integrate their story. And so, like, if there's a conflict that happens for them, being able to connect through them being able to conflict resolve and see things from other perspectives, and asking them to come up with the solution instead of us trying to solve it, is really important, because as parents, we're really tempted to fix everything for them because we love them so much. And to be able to fix things for them. We're making decisions for them then. And by us doing that and solving their problems, we're stopping them from building their own executive functioning. And that decision-making process is up in upper stairs brain. And that's a really cognitive skill to practice and learn. And as parents, when we talk too much and we try and solve their problems and we try and fix things, we're actually doing them a disservice, because that decision-making process where they get to decide and when they get to solve the problems, that is really important. And it could just be as simple as like, what outfit are you going to wear? Like, that's probably a really simple one for a 2-year-old. You know, I would give Aya options. I would lay out options for her, like before going to daycare, and she would pick what she wanted to wear. So she was making the decisions. When I noticed my mother, who loves spoiling her with clothes, loves gifting things, but she would force Aya to wear things and she wouldn't want to, or she would force feed her because my mum likes to feed. That's how she shows love. But Aya hated being forced into things. She likes to make the decisions for her body and herself, so that they would have major conflicts between them and butt heads. So at a young age, I always encouraged her to make decisions for herself, you know, and it could be like, what shoes are you wearing? What would you like to eat as a snack? You know, so that they feel a sense of control, that they're contributing and participating in this relationship. And so when we start looking at other relationships, either with siblings, you know, I know with my brother, we fought a lot. We loved each other, and then we fought a lot. And we grew up, and then like we're best mates now. But I remember fighting a lot, and, you know, a lot of things getting dismissed, denied, when I just wanted to be heard. And I wanted our relationship to be resolved in a different way. And so being able to, you know, if the siblings are fighting over like a toy, or someone's ripped up something, you know, or ruined something, being able to perspective take and go, well, you know, Mummy, Tommy just hit me. Okay, well, why did he hit you? Well, because, you know, I was trying to get him to do this thing, and then he was drawing, and then I pulled the drawing away from him. Oh, okay, so your actions made him get really, well, how was he feeling? He would have felt frustrated. So getting the child to then perspective take if it's something to do with siblings or friendship issues. I know with a couple of Aya's beautiful friends that we've had over play dates, when they've fought over things, I definitely use this perspective in getting them to, like, because they'll have a little banter and have a little fight, and then they'll both be crying. It's like, okay, let's get the conflict resolution hat on. And it's like, okay, well, such and such is feeling this way. Why do you think that, Aya? Well, because of blah, 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 blah. And then I'll go talk to the other child, and it's like, okay, well, how do we move forward from this? Or we need to share our toys. Or maybe we can do something else together instead of separately. Like, okay, guys, that's a really great solution. Let's try that. And so getting them to make these decisions is really, really cognitive process. And this executive functioning is really important for when we grow up and when we develop more and make decisions for ourselves, so that we don't get stuck and we know how to move forward in a situation, or we can, you know, be able to see things coming, or be able to work with different types of people and build that empathy and build that resilience and be able to collaborate and take other people's ideas in and perspectives. You know, this skill is so, so valuable. And so when we think about friendships or siblings, or being able to allow them to problem solve, that is really, really, really important. And Yeah, I always have to stop myself because I like to solve problems, and I noticed that I try and do that in my work situation, and I try and like preempt things and solve the problems before they happen. And then I noticed that in my personal life, and I was like, oh, okay, I actually need to take a step back and maybe just ask some questions or offer help or offer ideas. And if that's not the way forward, then there'll be a different situation, or there'll be other ways to move the conflict forward, or to listen to somebody else's ideas. So that's something that I've been working on personally, to just invite other responses instead of me trying to fix things. Because sometimes our children's ideas are just like really great. You're like, oh, I actually didn't think about that. Let's try that. Or, even with our partners, it's like asking instead of trying to do all the things. As mums, we get into martyrdom mode and do all the things for everybody. And it's like, well, if I just stopped and asked, or asked for help, or asked for this, or asked for another solution, it's like, oh, I could have done it that way. That would be way more easier, instead of me getting so focused and narrow-minded and going this. So being able to allow that decision-making process and that solutions-driven process to be guided by the child is really, really important. And that's by asking questions or offering ideas if they're still too young, and options. So there was a lot of different techniques to tap into these three things. And, we spoke about HALT, hungry, angry, lonely, tired, this idea of we're talking too much, and this idea of feeling it to heal it. And there was a whole heap of strategies within all of those three key traits that we delved into today. And coming back to your body, coming back to your senses, coming back to your nervous system for you as a mum, as an adult, as a human being, to then focus on your breath and give space for yourself, then allows you to then create space to handle anything, really, whether it's tantrums, whether it's this work situation, whether it's conversations and different relationships that you have with people. And I think, coming back to that one thing, which is our nervous system, is really, really important and so vital in anything we do. I know I said, is iron neurodivergent? No, sorry, I'm just looking at your questions there. No, I don't. I actually, neurodivergent also can tap into gifted kids as well, that really, so just thinking differently. I actually think she does think differently, but her ability to do maths and she's got this other way of thinking that I'm like, okay, that's actually really quite different as well. So yeah, I know it's interesting when I was just looking at neurodivergent. My brother, when he was over from Australia, I just, growing up, he was always my little brother. And we were having this conversation, and he brought up that he was neurodivergent. And that actually like sat with me for a little bit. And I was like, I never saw him in that way. He was just always my brother, and he always just was him doing his things. And it's just, when I looked at other podcasts and other groups that talk about neurodiversity and this framework of just brains and bodies being wired in a different way from the conventional way of thinking. Like, I think we're all neurodivergent really in different ways, but our beautiful children that are more sensory aware, in that neurodivergent category is just, I think that terminology is just a really inclusive, beautiful way to include a whole array of different things. And I love that divergent term as well. And the neuro part, if you break down the words, the neuro is like in your brain, the cerebral cortex and all all the things, you know, that happen cognitively in the diverse. You think about our world and the different abilities that people have and their gifts that they bring to the world and their strengths and their passions. I actually think we're all a little bit neurodivergent. And so I love that term, actually. And it does cater for a range of different things. So, I mean, we're the best, you know your child best. So we're the best advocates for our children. And when we know ourselves and we know how to tap into learning how to understand our children, I think that's a real gift, because our kids operate in so many different ways and they have so many strengths and abilities. Like for me, I am such a kinesthetic learner. I learn through experience. I learn through my body and by doing things. And me as a learner, that works best for me. The visual, the body, the experiential. When I work with other students and learners, some of them are just really visual and audio processing, and they really need to hear and listen to really absorb it. Some kids really struggle with that. And so when I get them to do and be and enact things out in drama, they shine so much because they're in their bodies. And there are kids that are just like numbers and like just so like can see formulas and patterns and things in a different way. And I'm like, I can't think like that. And I think about like my husband, he just sees things and like how things are structured, and he can see how things don't work. Like his mind is so different to mine. And I'm like, I don't understand what you mean. I need to see it. He's like, don't you see how this works in this? And I'm like, no, I don't. So yeah, I think that is really, really a cool term. But that's the end of this spiel of this beautiful webinar. I hope you've gotten a lot of value out of it. And it's a shame my PowerPoint didn't work. I was kind of just wing it, not wing it. It was planned. It was all there. But I'll send that through to you. And hopefully you liked hearing my voice. But are there any questions before we go? We've got a couple of minutes. Any questions about anything we've spoken about tonight, or any takeaways? Very thanks, Danielle. What's probably one key takeaway that you'd be happy to share? You could type it in. If you want to speak to it, you can speak to it. But if you would like to type in one key takeaway, I'd love to hear what one key thing was that you like would take away from this. Typing away. Connecting and redirecting. Yeah, beautiful, Danielle. Yeah, when I read that, I was like, oh my gosh, that makes so much sense. And like we do it innately, but when I framed up safe spaces, thanks Jody, yeah, and so the connecting and redirecting, it's that creating the safe space, as Jody was saying, yeah, that when we do that, it just changes so much for our little people and for ourselves. And knowing that safe space within ourselves as mums, that we are on track no matter what this journey looks like. I spoke about this one solution, and this solution is ourselves, really, and coming back to our bodies. And when we feel safe in our bodies and safe in trusting that we are doing the right things for our children, and we are there for them in this safety of them growing and developing their little bodies and minds into becoming adults, like that safety and that harnessing of our emotions and energy, like that is so important. And I stick by that. And whenever anyone says to me, you're too soft, I'm like, no, this is the hardest way to do things. To be this way and to love in this way, that's freaking hard because people don't do it. And this is hardcore. The way that we show up in this way, in understanding empathy and emotional intelligence, this is hardcore because people don't do it enough. Yes, learning about ourselves first. Beautiful. So thank you so much for your time. And I know some other beautiful ladies will be getting the replay of this. And thank you for engaging with me. And I know that you got some little gems of wisdom in there and would love some feedback. So feel free to DM me any feedback that you have. And I really appreciate your time and bless. And I hope you have a beautiful night. Thank you, gorgeous people.